Alright guys, I've watched Godzilla vs. Kong twice now. I've watched all 12 Kong movies, plus the 3 animated series. I feel like I'm ready to rank them all. First off is the original, the classic, 1933 King Kong. This is easy S tier. I mean, no question about it. One of the greatest movies ever made. This is the quintessential Kong film. You know, the orchestral score, the stop motion special effects, the beautiful Fay Ray, the tone, the atmosphere. It is just an incredible film, and it sets the standard and it sets the bar high for all the Kong movies that came after it. Easy S tier. Its sequel, Son of Kong, released only 9 months after the original. The production on this one was definitely rushed, but it's still a pretty fun movie. It's a lot sillier, and Kong's son here is a lot smaller than his father, but there's still some really awesome special effects here, and the action scenes are great. The fights here, I'd say, are on par, at least on par with the fights in the original. I think I'm going to put this one C tier. Sometimes I think they play up Kong a bit too much for comic relief, but it's usually pretty funny. And Baby Kong, he's very charming, very likable. It's amazing they made this so quickly after the original. Makes you wonder what they could have done given more time. I would have liked to see a true, proper sequel to the original Kong with the original cast and crew. Mighty Joe Young in the 40s was kind of that spiritual successor to the original. It had a lot of the same crew, and it's a really fantastic movie, but I would have liked to see a more proper kind of full-scale sequel. Next is the OG King Kong vs. Godzilla by Toho. This movie kind of revitalized not only Kong, who hadn't been in a movie for almost 30 years at that point, but Godzilla as well, who Toho hadn't used since Godzilla Raids Again in 1955. This was definitely a much different take on Kong. It's much more over the top and action focused. Really more of a Godzilla movie than a Kong movie. It's still very good though. One of the better Godzilla films of the Showa era. I'm going to put this, I think I'm going to put it C tier, right behind Son of Kong for now. It's a fun movie, but it's far from the best that either Kong or Godzilla have to offer. I'd recommend the original Japanese version over the English dub, especially if it's your first time watching it. The Japanese version just feels a little better paced. It's a little tricky finding it on home media, but in America at least, but it's definitely worth seeking out. 5 years later, Toho followed up with King Kong Escapes. This time without Godzilla in it. It's not really a sequel to the last film. It's actually based on the Rankin Bass King Kong show cartoon from the 60s. That's the same production company who did Rudolph and all those stop motion Christmas specials. Unfortunately, their Kong wasn't stop motion, but he does have a brand new design here, which I think is a big improvement over his design in King Kong vs. Godzilla. This movie is somewhat a more traditional Kong story, but it's definitely very campy and silly. It feels like a Saturday morning cartoon, which obviously makes sense given its source material. It's well done though, and very fun to watch. Mechanic Kong is great. The effects are classic Toho. I think I actually prefer this to King Kong vs. Godzilla. Maybe even Son of Kong. I might have to put this B tier actually. This might have to go B tier for now. Alright, next is the 76 King Kong remake. This one I feel is often overlooked, kind of a little underrated. For 1976, the special effects are outstanding. It's not stop motion, which is what I think bothers some fans. It's actually suitmation like the Toho films. But this was the first time we really saw suitmation with a proper Hollywood budget, and it really looks fantastic. It blows what Toho was doing only a few years prior out of the water. Kong's mechanized head and eyes give the character a lot of personality and emotion, and the implementation with the actors is really convincing. I think it's one of the best practical special effects movies ever made, and keep in mind this was almost 2 decades before Jurassic Park. I think I'm gonna have to put this, I think it might be A tier. It's either high B tier or A tier. Obviously it doesn't top the original, and it's not without its flaws, but I think it's a good update on the Kong story. It tells the same basic storyline, but it's a modernization and a kind of corporate commentary on the post-60s era. You know, the Empire State Building becomes the World Trade Center. The film expedition becomes an oil expedition. I much prefer this twist on the story rather than it just being a simple rehash of the original, like some of the movies we'll see later on this list are. It told its own version of the story, and I think it did it pretty well. And, you know, of course, Kong is the one constant here, representing eternal nature or whatever. One negative is there's really no fights in this one. There's a brief scene with a giant snake, I think, but no real wrestling matches for Kong here, which would have been awesome to see with this level of special effects. The sequel, King Kong Lives, didn't come out until 10 years later, and nowadays it's mostly forgotten or laughed at, honestly. This shakes the Kong formula up even more by giving him a fellow primate love interest as opposed to a blonde lady. It's as campy and silly as it sounds, but there's also some real heart to the story. You know, at first you're kind of laughing at the ridiculousness, you know, Kong and his girlfriend hanging out on Honeymoon Ridge or whatever. But by the end, I don't know, at least for me, I was sort of emotionally invested. And the ending, without giving too much away for those who haven't seen it, is kind of this universally poignant, familial kind of message. I'm going to put this C tier, low C tier. It's definitely not a great film, and I get a lot of the criticism thrown at it, but if you kind of adjust your expectations and curb your cynicism a little bit, it's not too bad. The special effects are pretty much on par with the last one, which is a good thing. Kind of a shame we didn't get to see any leap forward with the effects that the 10-year production difference might suggest, but I assume the sequel had a much lower budget, so I guess that's to be expected. The one thing I will say is I think Kong's suit actor was slightly better in this one. Just felt a little more natural. I don't know. Next we have The Mighty Kong, which was a 1998 direct-to-video cartoon musical. It's actually a fairly faithful adaptation of the Kong story. The animation is basically your standard 90s TV cartoon quality. Moments of it reminded me stylistically a little bit of Batman the Animated Series, which is certainly not a bad thing. But I'm going to have to put this D tier. Because the problem I had with this one is it rehashes the Kong story for children, but I feel like the original King Kong is already pretty suitable for younger audiences. You know, I can't really imagine too many, 4 or 5-year-olds being all that disturbed by the original King Kong. So this animated musical version just feels kind of redundant and doesn't really do anything new or interesting. Maybe if you have a kid or a niece or nephew or something that's really young or finds King Kong too scary, but you still want to share the Kong story with them. I don't know. I think for me, I just show my kid the original Kong. So I'm going to have to leave that in D tier. Okay, this next one might be a little controversial. Peter Jackson's King Kong. Most people I talk to either really like or really dislike this one. I fall into the latter category. For me, this movie is just so superfluous. It has a 3-hour runtime, which for some films is fine. I have no problem with long movies, but this one manages to add almost nothing new at all to the original King Kong story, which was only half the length. It's almost impressive, really, that you can double the length of something without adding anything interesting or original at all. It's just a drawn-out, tepid rehash of what came before it. Even homage would be too generous of a title. It hits the same story beats we've seen so many times before without bringing anything new to the table that it's really hard to connect emotionally with this film's glitz. Like, who wants to wait 3 hours to see fucking Jack Black mimic a famous line that was better delivered 70 years before?
It wasn't the airplanes. It was
Peter Jackson.
Kill the beast.
It just feels artificial. There's no payoff, no satisfaction in Jackson's indulgent replication. To make things worse, the CGI now looks very dated, so it doesn't even look good. You know, it's not like it's a completely incompetently made film or anything. It's just so unnecessary that I find it kind of insulting and really boring. This is going in D tier. I think I'll put it ahead of Mighty Kong. Because, you know, like I said, it's not like it's a poorly made film or anything. It's just, I'd say maybe 95% of it is just kind of unnecessary. The best thing that came out of this movie was the stop motion Lost Spider Pit sequence recreation from the original King Kong that was in the special features on the DVD. Next we have Kong, King of Atlantis. I think this was either direct to video or maybe it premiered on TV. It's based on the early 2000s Kong the Animated Series. This was just made as a cash grab to capitalize on Peter Jackson's King Kong. I think it actually came out like a month before it. The cartoon it's based on ended like years earlier. So yeah, and that itself was basically just a ripoff of Godzilla the Animated Series. It's just really mediocre. I wasn't a fan of the cartoon to begin with. We'll get to that later. And this is basically just more of that. There's like 3 random musical sequences thrown in. Some of the mythos was kind of had potential, like Kong being the former king of Atlantis and all. But they never really go too into it. The big fight at the end too was almost cool. It had potential, but yeah, you could skip this one. I'm gonna put it in F tier. And if you thought that one was bad, wait till you see Kong Return to the Jungle. Based on the same cartoon and also made to capitalize on the 2005 King Kong, but now with the shittiest CGI animation you've ever seen. I mean, seriously, this came out in like 2006, 2007, but the CGI isn't even on par with like Beast Wars from the 90s. It's so bad. Even from a narrative and writing perspective, it's just somehow worse than King of Atlantis in every way. Hands down, worst Kong movie ever made. It's gotta go in F tier. Next we have Kong Skull Island, the first appearance of Kong in Legendary's Monsterverse. Thankfully, it's a very fresh and different take on the Kong story. Feels a little more in line with the 60s Toho Kong, which of course makes sense given the series this film is in. Kong feels more, you know, kaiju-like here. They did a good job making him feel very mythical. It's a lot of fun for what it is. It's not perfect. Brie Larson and Tom Hiddleston or whatever are really absolutely terrible here. Very flat characters, very flat acting. There's a few moments where it seemed like they tried to shoehorn in some romance with Kong, but it just feels forced. There's some annoying moments and some Kong mythos that's kind of been watered down, but it's still just a solid, big, fun, dumb popcorn movie. John C. Reilly is great here. He basically gives the film its only humor and emotion. John Goodman was underused completely, I think. Would have liked to see more of him rather than Brie Larson and Tom Hiddleston. Samuel L. Jackson is, you know, he's here. He's Samuel L. Jackson. He got the whole Colonel Kurtz thing going on. The film has about the wit of a Battlefield Vietnam video game trailer, but you know, who doesn't like some Vietnam exploitation and giant monkeys? You got the Heart of Darkness references, the obligatory Creedence Clearwater. It's dumb, but it's fun. The action is good, the CGI is pretty good. Can't really complain. At least it's not another rehash. I'm gonna put this high C, I think. You know, I kind of want to put it B. I'm going to put it B. I'm going to put it low B right now. And then we come to Godzilla vs. Kong. I've seen this. I watched this on HBO Max and in theaters. I will say if you can see this one on the big screen, it's a lot more thrilling. Go support your local movie theater. Keep them alive. But yeah, I actually really like this one. There's a lot of annoying moments, like the subplot with the Stranger Things girl and the fat kid from, well, I know him from, what's that movie? Hunt for the Wilder People. But he's also in Deadpool 2. Some of it was, you know, kind of funny, but it just felt inconsequential. And the whole part, I won't spoil it, but the part with the, you know, with the pouring of the alcohol was just stupid. The action though, the fights, which are what really matters, I thought were very well done. There's a lot of cool moments here. They had a lot to the mythos of both Godzilla and Kong. That's really all I can say, you know. It's not a perfect film, but the action scenes are a lot of fun. Mechagodzilla's design I wasn't crazy about, but he was still pretty cool. I don't know, was it just me or did the CGI here look a little worse than the previous MonsterVerse films? I think it might be a case like with the, original Lord of the Rings trilogy, like the Fellowship of the Ring CGI aged better than its sequels because it wasn't as reliant on it. Godzilla vs. Kong obviously is a lot more reliant on CGI, and I wouldn't be surprised if this doesn't age as well as the previous movies in this series. Don't get me wrong, it's not bad by any means, but it's just something I kind of noticed. But yeah, still a good time. I'm more or less happy with the direction the MonsterVerse has gone so far. I think all the entries are at least decent, and I hope they keep making more of these. I'm going to put Godzilla vs. Kong, I'm going to put it right in front of Kong Skull Island. It might change over time, but for now, yeah, I think that's where it's going to be. Alright, next I'm going to rank the 3 animated Kong series. First is the King Kong show from the 60s, produced by Rankin Bass. This was the basis for Toho's King Kong Escapes. It's an okay kids cartoon. Feels more like, like a Hanna-Barbera, like Magilla Gorilla or something than an actual proper King Kong show. But for an episode or two, it's not that bad. If anything, just check out the hour-long pilot episode. From the episodes I watched, that one was my favorite. I'm going to put this in D tier. It's fine for what it is, but it's not really a great piece of Kong media by any means. Then we have Kong the Animated Series. I'm sure you guessed how I feel about this one. I'm sure some of you out there might have grown up with this and have some nostalgia for it. I watched it a few times when I was a kid, I remember, but I was never too crazy about it. It's basically what you'd expect from an early 2000s mediocre kids cartoon. The Kong here doesn't really feel like Kong. He's actually a clone of the original Kong, but he's basically just a dumb monkey with really no personality. The main character, Jason, is really creepy and annoying. The premise here is more like, I don't know, Animorphs or something than it is King Kong. It's still better than the CGI garbage Return of the Jungle, but I think I'll put it behind King of Atlantis, because at least King of Atlantis doesn't have dozens of episodes. The most recent Kong animated series from Netflix got a lot of flack when it came out. I think people were expecting a more serious Kong show. People were waiting for Skull Island to come out, and I just think this came out kind of at the wrong time in terms of what Kong fans were wanting and expecting. The negative reviews are why I initially avoided this series. In retrospect, though, I actually like this a lot more than I thought I would. You have to go into it knowing that this is definitely a show for children, but with that in mind, it actually surprised me. The CGI here looks really good. It's nicely stylized. I think it will age decently. There's some funny moments, even some adult humor thrown in there. Narrative-wise, it feels a lot like the King Kong show from the 60s with, evil scientists and cyborg dinosaurs and a lot of kind of crazy over-the-top stuff. If anything, I'd say at least watch the feature-length pilot episode. It's like an hour and a half pilot episode, which is really weird for a kid's show to have, but it's more narrative-based, and I actually got really into it. It was a solidly engaging story. It's just lighthearted fun with some cool Kong moments, but it was a fun story. The subsequent episodes are more, kind of monster of the week type episodes. Like the narrative arc doesn't really seem to progress much. I haven't finished it yet, but every now and again I'll throw an episode on, and I've been really enjoying it. I'm going to put this low C tier. Not amazing, but I think it's the best Kong show we've had so far. I know they're planning on doing another animated Kong show, I think through Netflix. I think it's supposed to come out this year. Hopefully that is good, and I think it's from Legendary, or I think it's at least takes place in the MonsterVerse. So yeah, let me know if you're looking forward to that, and let me know. I'm sure a lot of you disagree with some of these placements, but let me know how you would rank them, and why you agree or disagree with my choices. You know what? I think I'm gonna move Son of Kong up. It doesn't feel right being in C tier. It's still got that classic Kong feel to it. I think I'm gonna put it right in front of the MonsterVerse movies. The more I think about it, the more I realize how much I actually like Son of Kong. So yeah, I think the final ranking is number 1 in S tier, obviously the 1933 Kong, then the 1976 remake, King Kong Escapes, Son of Kong, Godzilla vs. Kong, Kong Skull Island, King Kong vs. Godzilla, King Kong Lives, the Netflix show Kong King of the Apes, Peter Jackson's King Kong, The Mighty Kong, The King Kong Show, Kong King of Atlantis, Kong the Animated Series, and worst of all, Kong Return to the Jungle. Like I said, let me know what you guys think of this ranking, and let me know how you would rank these. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.